Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. This week's guest is Chris Polley, the Vice President of Customer Success at Catapult. Catapult, of course, is an organisation recognised as a global leader in sports technology, and we'll be discussing the importance of effective communication, the challenges teams face from potential data overload, and the significance of understanding the demands of different sports in order to get the very best out of modern technology that is available. So, let's hear from Chris Polley now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, Chris, it's great to have you on the podcast this week. As if to emphasise the global nature of Catapult, I'm here recording this podcast in the UK. It's early morning. You're down under in Australia. It's evening time over there. Catapult is truly a global organisation, and this really bears face to that. So it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. First podcast, by the way, that I've ever done. So it's good to be here. Yeah, I was just saying before as we were chatting, it's opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of weather too. You've got a t-shirt on, and I've got a big jacket. So definitely a global company.
I don't think you're going to find much sympathy from any of our UK listeners, given that you live down there in Victoria, and we're all very well aware of how great the weather can be, certainly in the summer for Australians. Now, your title at Catapult is the Vice President for Customer Success. Well, I was on your website before we started recording today, and by Catapult's own numbers, your products are now being operated in more than 128 countries, across more than 40 sports, and used by in excess of 4,400 teams globally. That suggests to me that you have a vast portfolio. So if you're able to, try and just summarise for us what the role is for the Vice President of Customer Success at Catapult.
Yeah, well, I guess to start too, I mean, those impressive numbers, and actually when I first started 11 years ago, we just moved office, and the boardroom was I think a pool table with a plank of wood over it. It was true sort of start-up company, and here we are kind of 11 years later with those sorts of numbers. So it's been a pretty impressive journey. In terms of, I guess, my role, so we've got a team of customer success. So it's a team of sports scientists really, and we've kind of rebranded to customer success, and we actually operate in, I think, 16 countries around the world. We have people in 16 countries around the world. We've got a group of about 55 sports scientists, and I manage, I guess, the different regional leads of that sports science group. So, yeah, we're far and wide. I think we speak a total of about 20 languages between those 55 sports scientists and performance analysis, as well as we sort of cross-pollinate with our video products. So, yeah, I manage that group. I manage through the time zone challenges as well, which you mentioned, which is always...
Do you speak all those languages?
Which is always fun. I know. One of my biggest regrets, funnily enough, is I did Japanese in school, and as I was learning it, I decided I'm not sure if I'll ever need to use this, and lo and behold, it would have been nice to have kept going with that. But no, I speak a few words in each, but definitely not as fluent as the people we've got in the business. So yeah, we our main role primarily is to, I guess, support our customers' journey, both pre-sale as well and through to post-sale, and make sure that they can, I guess, maximise the value of our products, and we can kind of educate them on best practices in both, the wearable GPS side of the business and also the video performance analysis side of the business.
Yeah, and Catapult is an organisation that's now widely regarded as a global leader in sports technology and performance monitoring. It's about data, it's about analytics. And when your products are being operated so widely around the world across so many different sporting environments by so many teams, there's a lot of information there to disseminate. So I imagine you will see more broadly global trends begin to develop. So from Catapult's perspective, what are those broad trends that you're seeing? And perhaps more specifically, what are we seeing top tier teams now prioritizing when it comes to performance science?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, yeah, we get a pretty good lens of the market across the different regions and the different sports. So we get a good sense of kind of what's coming in the industry. I mean, aside from the obvious ones are some of the emerging tech around AI and the way that's going. I think one of the things we're seeing, I guess, more frequently now in this space as well is like the data aggregation and data integration piece and the technologies that kind of surround that. That's always been a kind of utopia for teams, right? Is to get all the disparate data sets, bring them into a central kind of repository, so to speak, and then be able to link that together and inform decision making through all the different pieces of technology information that they get. So I think one of the big trends that we're seeing in this space is a lot of teams are trying to solve that puzzle in terms of how do they bring things centrally and then how do they make sense of all that kind of with an analytics layer, but bringing that in and then having it aggregate and aligning things to video so it provides context. So there's a lot of technology around.
Dilemma, isn't it, between the volume of data that's brought in for them as well, as opposed to the quality that they can utilize?
Yeah, and this is one of the great, I guess, challenge for the teams in this space is what you sort of prioritize too. There's so much data coming in. There's some great data coming in. There's some data that might have some limitations, and then how do you make sense of all of that information? I think we find too, and it sounds overly simplistic, but a lot of the times what we see in really teams who kind of utilize the technology successful is they keep it really simple. So they have a lower volume of data, but have a real high quality of data, and they really understand what that data is, what it represents. They understand the limitations and how to apply it. And that's kind of, it sounds easy to an extent, but it's really difficult to do as well, to do that with the amount of data that's coming in, to try and understand it and then pick the small part that you can do really well. So I think the basics actually are one of the things that we see really good teams do. They do the basics, and you hear that in sport a lot of the time, right? The fundamentals of sport that kind of underpin success, and I think that reigns true in this space too.
Are there significant regional differences, if you like? Because we mentioned the number of sports that are using Catapult products right now, but if you're utilising those products as a Premier League footballer, as opposed to the AFL or the NFL over in the States as well, I'd imagine there are different demands from different sports on what is significantly impacting what they do.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities too. I think that when we talk about doing the basics, like a lot of the basic principles of sports science, periodization and monitoring, and they're quite consistent across sports. But the big differences lie in the demands of the sports. And I guess if you were to pick a sports scientist up and move them around the different sports, one of the key things that we need to do is really understand, right, what are the demands placed on, and there's a lot of research out there that helps with this, what are the demands placed on the sport? What are the important moments look like, and what drives that physically? Looking at even deeper in terms of like the cultural aspect of the data in the sport, how receptive are athletes and coaches in the sport to receiving information. So a lot of the principles of sports science are the same across sports, whether it's field-based, court-based, in terms of how you look at data and analyse it. But I think a lot of the differences are in truly understanding the dynamics of the sport, what success looks like, what different athlete profiles look like, which help success in those sports. and then truly understanding that, and then applying the basics to those nuances in each sport. That's probably the main, I guess, difference, particularly culturally too. I think that's often it's kind of more subjective, right? But there are huge cultural differences in different regions and different sports and how they're receptive to data. So that changes how you can do things and how far you can kind of, I guess, push things in those environments as well. But by and large, there's a lot of similarities too.
Yeah, and I guess given what you've said, for the untrained eye, it's easy to get lost in the data and the analytics, isn't it? I know we had a colleague of yours, Jacques Greenwald, on the show around 2 months ago following the launch of the new Vector 8 system. And he was saying to us that piece of software now enables teams to track up to 120 different athletes at any one time across a vast area as well. So this is where I guess we try and demystify the value of Catapult products, because there's this wealth of information coming in all the time. We've already said quality over quantity is the key for teams. I'm guessing that you constantly get feedback from your clients, your customers as well. So for anyone listening that does ask the question, how do you get best value out of what Catapult is offering out there when you could get lost in a forest of analytics and numbers?
Yeah, no, I mean, I probably speak for all of us. We've all been lost at some points. I've certainly been lost at a lot of points. And yeah, I mean, just reflecting on, I guess, my own kind of experiences is, I guess, really trying to, and where we see the benefit working in the business as well as, you know, there's nuances to how, you know, we talk about all the different parameters and the amount of data. There's nuances and limitations and positive and benefits to all of the bits and pieces. And I think really, truly understanding that helps drive a lot of how you don't get lost in the data, right? Because, you know, there's 100 things coming at you. If you're looking at 20 or 30 different parameters and 10 are going up and 10 are going down, it's very hard to make decisions on, do we give them more, do we give them less? These two parameters which are saying similar things, one's up, one's down, what do we do? So I think truly understanding what the technology is giving you, which again, there's a lot of information out there to help understand with that, but truly understanding that and having a philosophy of what are we trying to achieve, what are the important things we're looking to measure, finding the parameter that's helping you answer that question, and having, you know, as we said before, a smaller rather than a greater number, I think just helps kind of lift yourself out of that noise a bit and give you more of a focus. And that's the starting point too, because obviously I think once, as we say, the fundamentals and basics they kind of form the grounding for what you do. It then gives you the opportunity to explore all the other things, you know, the other parameters and maybe some of the other insights you can get from the technology. But I think really understanding what you're trying to achieve in your program, what parameters are going to help you understand that, and using that as what kind of underpins what we do as a sports scientist. I feel like that's at least for me, that was the way that I've always tried to kind of get out of the noise and not get lost in the amount of information that's out there.
Yeah, and we spoke earlier about common trends you see. Equally, when you onboard clients, do you see common mistakes initially when they're first using these products and gaps that are left by teams, which I guess is where you come in with your post-sales help as well to help guide them and get the most out of that technology?
Yeah, I think that it's not necessarily a mistake either. It's sort of, it probably just goes back to our job is to try and educate the teams on kind of everything we just said. So out of the box, you know, and a lot of these, you know, globally, a lot of these users are really, really good sports scientists from looking at Catapult customers. So they really, truly understand what they're trying to achieve. But still there's an element where for us as sports scientists, because we understand what Catapult's building and the analytics coming out of our platform is educating them to help them through the noise. So a large part of our role is to try and help them avoid kind of the mistakes that we can potentially foresee, like using a lot of parameters to try and answer a lot of questions and trying to sort of rein it back in to trying to truly understand what they're trying to achieve, and then using what we understand about our technology to try and impart that on them and educate them. So I think part of our role is to try and get ahead of what mistakes could be made or what gaps there could be, and particularly in markets where the technology is quite new too, right? It's trying to educate them around, right, here's best practice for how we think the way that these things have been designed is how we would use them. What are you trying to achieve? And let's help kind of marry those things up. And that way it's sort of, we're educating our customers. Ultimately they use the technology how they want to use it. And the beauty of it is you can use it in so many different ways. But for us, I think that the gap is, the mistake is trying to do too much, and it's our job to try and, I guess, impart what we see as best practice on them to help them through that. So that's a large part of our job, in a sense, is doing that, but also in the context of understanding their environment. Like we pride ourselves and we understand a lot of Catapult sports scientists have worked in elite sport, and they understand the environments, they understand the pressures, the time pressure, that the way things can shift so quickly and the changing dynamic week to week in elite sport. So I think we try and, because we understand that, the way that we work kind of centres around that. We often, like, the immediacy of response is always a big one in elite sport, because something happens and then all of a sudden you need to try and understand why it happened, and teams need to know, right, how do I do that? And that's where we hopefully come in and say, right, here's how we would approach it. And because I think people have been in that environment, they understand how it operates, and that's kind of our philosophy of when we try and support customers. It's a pretty white label service really, where we try and be as accessible as possible to help them understand their data truly.
Yeah, and I guess these conversations provide you both with opportunities to integrate the data that's available into coaching conversations, because ultimately the reason you have the clients is because they want to get better as an organization. The reason this product is available is because if used correctly, it provides that opportunity for organizations to grow. So when you're having these discussions, how conscious are you of giving real world examples so that you can crystallize what the message that is that you're trying to get across?
Yeah, and I think this is the art of the science, this communication. I mean, one of the biggest benefits of the technology is that it should foster conversations. And as we talked about before, it's super complex, even from a sports scientist perspective. And, we're typically the ones that are most well versed in what the numbers mean. And then you've got to translate that to coaches, to athletes, to other stakeholders. So it's actually funny. It's education goes a long way, and we hear coaches talk about it here in Australia, where it's challenging for them when they're met with, right, Richard's done 33 efforts and 24 sprints, and they're sort of like, the raw numbers, what does that mean? So I think what a lot of teams are starting to do is, and one of the ways in which we try and help is how do you almost oversimplify what's really complex? Because when you're communicating it to coaches and athletes, you need to really oversimplify it. So, I mean,
it needs to be broken down into layman's terms, doesn't it, essentially?
Yeah, and some of the novel ways we've seen really well is and it might sound silly, but you've got your training plan on a wall, and that Monday there's a picture of a Ferrari, and Tuesday there's a Toyota Yaris. A bit of apologies for the insane.
Other
Monday's
supposed to be
available. Yes, sponsored by Toyota. Monday is supposed to be an intense session, a short, sharp and Tuesday might be a more of a longer duration session, less intensity, more volume, and just having those analogies helps coaches understand, right, the stimulus of Monday today is going to be a short, sharp, fast session, and the session is devised that way, as opposed to saying it's got to be this number and this number and this. It just helps. And I think that's what we see teams do really well is really oversimplify it and then put it into terms that, you know, most of us would understand.
Okay, let's focus a little bit more on that then, because we've got this wealth of technology, products available, being utilised around the world, different organisations, different teams, all looking to find that elusive extra 1% that might get them over the edge to win a title, win promotion. Maybe it's just survival that some teams are looking for. So when it comes to the service that Catapult provide on the front line, how are we seeing it being utilised? I'm not going to ask you to mention specific names or teams, but in common traits, where are we seeing your products utilised to their full potential and bearing dividends?
Yeah, it's a good question, and probably not to labour the previous point. I think one of our jobs is to try and help the team. So we think about it, how can we save teams time, or how can we generate more insights for teams? And both of those things have really tangible benefits. If we can save teams time through developing the software in smarter ways, it helps them actually spend more time looking at the data and understanding what it means, and then trying to actually use it and apply it, and, you know, get consistency with it to get the benefits that a team desires. And then obviously, how can we help them generate the most insights? So a lot of, to give you a more practical example of kind of a use case where we found, you know, someone was trying to look at, and fatigue's a really difficult concept in sports science, and, you know, measuring fatigue, and you could have a round table that would go for weeks in terms of how to do it. But, you know, a team was trying to answer that question, and because if you can answer that question somehow, it goes a long way to trying to win games of football, which this was an AFL team. So the relationship we have with the team was, look, you continue to do the basics and let us work with you on the side through our people, through our software, and try and find some ways where you can maybe get some more insights that you haven't had previously that, you know, might help get you an edge. So we actually developed a pretty cool, I think it was pretty cool, a pretty cool concept around one of our parameters, which is player load, which is kind of an all-encompassing parameter, but you can actually break it down into the different derivatives of what that is. So there's, you know, up and down, side to side, forward and back. And so we started to think, right, how do we, you know, when athletes are tired, let's say, or fatiguing, you know, hypothetically, do they change the way that they run? Are they a little bit more laboured? Are they a little bit, you know, is there a little bit more lateral movement, or, you know, lean in how they're moving? So we thought, right, let's try and look at 2D player load per metre and see if, you know, that changes over time when an athlete is getting fatigued. And fortunately enough, in one of their pre-season sessions, they actually did 2 back-to-back 2-kilometre time trials. The athletes didn't know they were going to do the second one, fortunately, so they maximal aerobic effort in the first one before the practitioner said, right, we're going to do it again. But that was actually a really good basis for us to go, okay, well, they're going to be exhausted on the second one. So we looked at what the first test versus second test looked like for this parameter, and saw there was a pretty significant statistical difference in a higher contribution of this, you know, load laterally and sort of forward and back. So, you know, could that be an example where that could be a proxy measure of, look, if when this happens, hey, is that something that might indicate fatigue? And then you obviously look at all the other technologies and things that are involved in the club to try and, you know, maybe sense check that. But I think that sort of thing is what is exciting about the technology, and then our roles within that is we're able to do that for a lot of teams and try and help them find that that something else that might be different to what they're currently doing, but might answer a performance question they have. So, and I think teams do a really good job of doing that themselves as well. They're always sort of trying to find ways of using the technology creatively to give themselves that edge. And credit to our engineers and our product people who have built a platform which is really dynamic, and it has a lot of flexibility in the ways it can be used, so it allows teams to be able to explore in that sort of way. So that's how I think we see the most, I guess, benefit to the technology and trying to get that 1% is it enables you to do that.
And I guess that really highlights how far technology has come in such a short period of time, because if you went back, I don't know, say 20 years ago, and pre-season training across many sports was pretty much an eyeball test, wasn't it? Sure, you had things like the bleep test and so on, but they're fairly rudimentary methods being used. And even today, to your average amateur sports athlete, sports fan, I guess you think of sports tech and you think of distance covered, passes completed, but basic elements. Whereas now you're talking in terms of subtle nuances that can give greater and deeper insights into the overall picture around a performance, a squad, a game.
Yeah, and it evolves really quickly too, the tech. So I think you're able to start to ask different performance questions and then have the technology actually help answer those performance questions. Because, yeah, I mean, part of one of my honours thesis was around GPS and the history of it, and it dates back to, like you say, the eyeball test or pen and paper. Someone moved from here to here and notating what happened and trying to calculate distances and things like that. And we've moved from that world to a world where sampling rates and frequencies are higher, and inertial sensors that are embedded in the technology. It's enabling us to look at really subtle micro movements, so that the performance questions that are being asked and answered is kind of helping to drive the industry as well. So yeah, it's come a very long way, but that's exciting because that's again where teams are trying to find that 1% and answer those performance questions, and now they've got the technology that enables them to do it too.
And you're seeing all this data and you're getting the feedback as well from your customers and clients. I wonder, are you seeing subtle differences, maybe major differences, between what good teams are doing and what the very best teams are doing when it comes to applying the sports science?
Yeah, and it's hard to say, it's hard to kind of look across and say this team is better or worse than this team, because it's all in the context of their organisation and their program and what they're trying to achieve. So it's difficult to compare and say someone's doing it better than others. I think the ones that give themselves the best opportunity for success are the ones that have the most, say, time or the ability to try and actually use what they're getting and then actually act on it and put it into their programming and spend the time. And one of our, obviously, philosophies is how do we save people time? I mentioned that before, it being important. It's because it allows the practitioners to then try and use that data and apply it in their training environment and focus on that. So we focus on the
that's
capture
highlighted.
piece.
I mean, we mentioned Vector 8 before, didn't we? But I know when we were speaking to Jacques Grinwald, it was one of the key components from his perspective of this software, that it's not just the number of athletes you can track at any one time. It's the fact that any number of members of the coaching staff can access it in real time, live, and utilize it. And when you talk about those 1% saving time, making it more streamlined, these things matters to elite level performers of professional clubs.
And especially as it accumulates over time. So, if we're saving, minutes, hours in a day, in isolation, it's a great benefit. But if you're saving, tens and 20 and 30 hours a week and over the course of a year, it's giving that practitioner that time back to, right, what is this information telling me? How do I apply it? How do I then understand it as well to have, like we were talking about before, to then go and have better conversations with the coach, better conversations with the athlete, which then helps them understand the data. And then that is a bit of a flywheel that just then helps build that entire program out and helps the whole organisation understand the role that the technology plays to improve performance. So I think that's, it doesn't sound like, we're saving people time, but the actual benefit of that cumulatively over a long period of time is huge, because the biggest benefit is being able to apply it and use it. So we want to be able to make sure that we're giving the practitioners that time to do that. I think that's, we talk about the 1%, like that's a huge component of trying to achieve it, because then you can explore, as we talked about before, like those teams that are trying to explore different ways of utilising it, they also have the time to do that. So it's kind of multifaceted how that helps an organisation improve.
Yeah, and in a data-hungry world that we live in at the moment, I've got no doubt as well that no sooner does the latest evolution of technology hit the market, then there's a demand and hunger for more from these elite organisations. So the million-dollar question I've got for you, Chris, then, is working in this sphere, what is it, in your opinion, that you think makes a great sports scientist in the modern game, across any sport?
It's a good question, and I think I could probably give you. I'll try and give you. I'm probably still trying to figure that out myself for myself, but I think I could probably give you two answers. I think I think called the obvious one, but the one is obviously like this industry moves at a really rapid rate, and there's so many fantastic researchers out there and organisations and practitioners. So the things that people are doing, even in the last few years, you've got different algorithms and different ways of looking at data, and that's
is it tough for you to keep up with as somebody that's an experienced leader in this field right now?
It is, yeah, because you also need the time to kind of critically appraise it and utilise it to see if it works for what you're trying to achieve. So it's great to know the theory, but then to actually be able to apply it. As we say before, often teams try and do the basics. So talk about doing too much. You can't kind of grab everything that's out there and try and do it all at once. So I think it is difficult to stay on top of. And I think what makes a good sports scientist is the ability to try and stay on top of that, to see where the industry's going, to see the things that are taking the good ideas and the things that the industry is doing, and then trying to really understand them and apply them. And obviously Science for Sport's a perfect example of a platform that centralises a lot of that and educates the market. So I think continual education is obviously a big one, and the way the industry is moving in terms of, we talk about data analytics and the skills that kind of underpin generating more insights. Like there's a lot more coding now, and there's a number of tools that interface with code a lot that can provide all these different insights. So I think having skill sets in that space is really important. I think that the other side of it, and that might be more objective, I think that the subjective one is, and we've touched about it a lot, about communication and culture and the way that organisations operate, and it's just shifting, and the dynamics are constantly changing. I think being able to thrive in that environment, I mean, it's challenging, and I think to be able to showcase that you've got the ability to do that and be malleable and be adaptive to change and be a really good culture fit, personality-wise, and being able to communicate, because you've got a lot of stakeholders who are interested in what you're doing and want the information so that they can, do their job. So I think how to do it, like that's the $1 million question, but I think that's a really a good skill set for any sports scientist to develop, is just being able to work in that 360 degree environment under pressure, because wins and losses matter in sport too. So, and that can change the dynamics week to week. So I think continually upskilling, definitely, aligning yourself to some of the trends in the market in terms of the data and the analytics and some of the tools that are out there to help that. And then that I guess personality piece and being able to work in that environment is probably what I would think would make a good sports scientist.
Yeah, and for any aspiring sports scientists that are listening or watching this podcast via our YouTube channel, that I plan on going down this route as well. I'd imagine that there are egos involved in the industry, because we're talking about highbrow technology, advancements pushing the barrier. There's no way I can perceive that you cannot have egos. However, I guess somewhere along the line, it's quite beneficial as well if you're able to just every so often take a step back and listen, even if it's critical, isn't it? But that can't be easy.
Yeah, and I think when people say ego, I think people naturally gravitate to it might be a bad thing, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think what actually makes good cultural organisations is you've got a really good cross section of different I call it egos or different personality types, and yeah, I think it helps to be able to look at it two ways. It helps to be able to be really confident in what you're doing and believe in what you're doing and do it consistently and do it well, and that probably takes a personality type to keep driving that. But then too, because of what we discussed about the industry, it's good to take a step back and learn from others as well, and learn from individuals within your own organisation, because to be successful, there's a lot of things that have to come together to be successful, particularly in elite sport. And you want to be able to take a step back and make sure that you're fitting into that cultural fit of being able to fit together with all the different things that need to happen to be successful. So I think there's I don't even know if I call them egos. There's a lot of different personality types that work in sport, and I think it all sort of complements each other, and that's kind of what makes it quite unique too. Is in a lot of these sports, there's different cultures and different languages and different people and different walks of life. So I think it's being able to drive your standards and what you want to achieve, but then also take a step back to make sure that you're taking all in everything around you. I think it's important to be able to do both.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a final piece of advice as well for anyone that perhaps is in line for a job opening, an elite role with a professional organisation, how, in your opinion, do you make yourself stand out? Because you're dealing in a sphere where everybody's intelligent, everybody brings something new to the table. So if somebody said to you, Chris, what would be your one recommendation that you think would help me stand out from the pack? What would it be?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's so hard to put one thing on it, isn't it?
I'm glad I finished with a really good one anyway.
Yeah, can we cut it now? Do you know what? I think it goes back to kind of what we spoke about before in terms of, I think having that network really helps, because I think being open-minded in this space is critical because it moves so fast. I think being able to show yourself in that light, if we're talking about, job interviews per se, where naturally people are being compared to each other for a role, I think one of the things that stands out the most in elite sport is, does that personality fit in what we're trying to achieve? And being, like I said before, being malleable and being able to go with the ups and downs and be pretty consistent with how you carry yourself in that organisation too, because you can, things are never as good as they seem and things are never as bad as they see. You hear coaches talk about that all the time, and I think if you can come across like that, it helps set that kind of culture for the organisation. And again, how people get that skill set, I think there's probably a lot of benefit in a lot of the leadership like pieces and looking at different, I guess, whether it's corporate or whether it doesn't necessarily have to be in sport, but skills from those kind of arenas as well that I think, make you pretty well rounded to be able to be pretty level throughout the time. So I think how that comes across is definitely, I think, something that we've found that really helps an aspiring to get that job or get that position, and obviously passion too. You got to love what you do, and I think that comes for people who do love what they do. I think it comes through when they talk about this sort of stuff, right? So I think, it's $1 million question because I'm not sure I have the actual answer, but that's probably one for me that stands out.
So surmising then, have passion, but never get too high when things are going well, never get too low when things are going poorly. There's potentially a career in management and coaching for you, Chris Polley, as well here.
Well, look, I'd love to do it at some point. I need all my coaching badges, but I am a sucker for punishment too. So coaching can be that. So I'll be open to opportunities.
Listen, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having this discussion with you today. Really appreciate your time. We'll let you get away now and enjoy the rest of your evening down there in Australia. For those that have enjoyed this conversation and want to be able to follow you along social media lines, where can they find you?
I don't actually have a big social media presence. I do have Twitter, but again, I'm typically a lurker, and that's where I get a lot of good research and that. So, I think it's Chris Polley 5. I mean, you could probably go through the likes and see what I like, but I'm not sure you'll get much out of my social media. But no, look, thanks for having me on. It's been fun.
Some would say that was a very wise strategy when it comes to operating in the social media world. Chris, it's been great having you on. Thanks once again, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Richard.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
A huge thanks to Chris for taking the time to join us down there in Australia and share his expertise and insight into the evolving world of sports technology. If you enjoyed what he had to say and want to find out more, you can do so by visiting our website, www.scienceforsport.com. And if you've particularly enjoyed this episode, please do feel free to share it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. As I always point out at this juncture, the more downloads we get, the much easier it becomes for us to attract top-name athletes or experts at the leading cutting edge of their field. Well, that is just about all for this week. Thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to joining you all again on the next edition of the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.